Here I go, here I go, here I go. Yeah, here I go, here I go.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of the Take Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Burleson, of course, and in today's episode, the NCAA, Thursday, May 23rd, and the so-called Power 5 conferences reached a groundbreaking agreement that seeks to end the century-old tradition of amateurism in college sports by allowing athletes to receive pay directly from the colleges and universities they play for. Now, how is this going to happen? The general terms of a settlement will see the NCAA pay nearly $2.8 billion in damages over 10 years to nearly 14,000 players. It also creates a new system that allows schools to use up to $21 million a year to pay student athletes. This is, as I just read, groundbreaking, okay? So you heard the salary cap. You heard a couple of things. So yes, the NCAA is a professional league. They will have professional policies in place for these athletes with revenue sharing. Athletes will get a cut of the TV money, the merchandise, ticket sales, and also anything revolving around their sport. They will get compensation for that. Now the 21 million. These schools can spend up to 21 million, but if you have more, you can spend more than that and use the NIL money, because NIL is still going to be a thing. Now, universities can directly pay athletes from the university. They don't have to use boosters or any second parties to pay these athletes under the table. So no more Johnny Football in 2012. That's not going to be a thing anymore. And no, Johnny Football does not get the payback, which they're going back to 2016 to pay these athletes. They're not getting that. Now, what does this mean for scholarships and things like that? And are there walk-ons still in the NCAA? Because you are paying these athletes, so you can't just have a guy on the team that's getting no money. So this, I think, in my opinion, I think this is the most noticeable impact is the NCAA's traditional scholarship limits will be roster size limits. So you're going to be putting a cap on how many guys you can have on a roster. Football roster, let's say you cap a roster at 90, but all those guys are under scholarship. So there's going to be more scholarships, but there's going to be less roster spots, which is the one thing that the NCAA is going to be looking to have. Now, when it comes down to Title IX, will men and women athletes get paid the same amount? This is a little bit tricky because you would say yes, but Title IX is in place for amateurs. So does Title IX apply to the NCAA anymore with it being a professional league? You would think no, but if it's not, it's going to really impact women's sports, especially at the collegiate level, which is now a professional level. That's going to be very challenging. That's going to be very difficult because whether you pay the women's basketball team the same as the men's basketball team, that's going to really depend, because if it's professional and the revenue sharing, it's going to be different. The TV contracts are going to be different. The ratings are going to be different. The ticket sales are going to be different. Everything is going to be different from a number standpoint. So there's going to be no way to pay women and men the same amount if Title IX does not apply, with NCAA being a professional league and amateurism is no longer being protected. So that's going to be a whole complex situation the NCAA is going to have to dive into. We mentioned the universities are going to be directly paying athletes. And the NCAA apparently is trying to avoid doing the employer-employee relationship with these athletes. They're going to try to pay them differently and avoid that relationship. So that's going to be interesting to see how they do come up with that. But the NCAA still needs this plan approved by a federal judge. So it's not official yet, but if it does become official, which it's scheduled to be official by November election time, fall 2025 is when it will be implemented into college athletics. This is insane. I never would have thought that NCAA athletes would have been paid salary. Now there's a salary cap, recruiting. You can offer players money, and the $21 million, by the way, that each university is allowed to spend on athletes, they don't have to spend the whole amount. They can spend as much as they want. They just have to understand that if you're not making the financial commitment by not spending all that money, you are putting yourself in a competitive disadvantage. So the NCAA has got to rewrite some of their rules, but that's what schools need to understand at the current moment, is if they don't spend the money, don't complain when your team is not doing as well as other schools who do spend the money and go beyond, because you are allowed to go beyond, and including NIL money. So you can use some NIL money to go above and beyond that, which means it's really going to affect college football in the conferences. Michigan and Ohio State are going to be just gapping Minnesota or Purdue in football, because those programs don't have the money that Michigan and Ohio State have to pay their athletes beyond the $20 million that they're already getting. And they're not a premier program. They don't have as big of a name when it comes to the football world. So it's definitely a ripple effect. It definitely benefits college football, but does it? Because it seems like college football is trying to thin the herd when it comes to these smaller programs being involved and competing for a national championship. Because down the line, you could have 50 or 40 schools competing for a national championship instead of, as we have, hundreds now. So it's going to eliminate schools, because some schools are going to be able to keep up financially, which means that sports could get cut in the NCAA. Programs could be cut because they may not be able to afford it. We're going to see who can economically be good and keep a team on the field and who can't really quickly. We're gonna figure that out really fast, because these smaller schools are not going to last a second with an Alabama or Texas. They're not going to last a second. And their competitive advantages are going to be just insanely wide, because you're a professional league. You now have free agency officially. You don't have to go around the table, which brings me to this situation. So obviously you see the Florida State background. Florida State got in trouble, and they agreed to 2 years of probation, a 3-game suspension for the assistant offensive coordinator Alex Atkins, recruiting restrictions, a loss of scholarships, and a fine equaling $5,000 plus 1% on the football program's budget. The Seminoles now want the penalties reduced. They want them reduced because now there's no such thing as a recruiting violation. There's no such thing as paying a guy under the table. There's no such thing as having an NIL brand be illegal to relate with a recruit or directly be involved with a recruit. So now Florida State can contest this and be like, hey, can we get these scholarships back? Because that affects our roster spots. Because with less scholarships means less roster spots. So if you don't have a lot of scholarships, you're not going to have a lot of roster spots. And it was NIL-related violations, but does Florida State's football program get these penalties just completely erased with now this is coming back? Because now the NCAA is paying athletes back all the way to 2016. They can at least get some of these penalties from Florida State reduced, which would help the football program. But the amateur status is no longer a thing. It's going to be very interesting to see if how Title IX works going forward, because it's only for amateurs, it's for education and things like that, to give women just an equal opportunity to be paid the same. And now it's professional league. You're not held to those standards. You don't have to do that. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all this unravels. Do I think the NCAA panicked? Yeah, because if they didn't agree to a $2.8 billion settlement, they were going to be losing $20 billion. So would you rather lose $2 billion or $20 billion? I mean, that's what it comes down to. I just don't think the NCAA really thought the ripple effect through, oh, we might be losing in other sports. But does it really matter because they make the majority of their money from basketball and football anyway? So that's a conversation to be had. But I'm your host, Jackson Burleson. This has been another episode of the Take Podcast. I hope you guys got a better understanding of what is going to be going on with the NCAA in the future and things like that and to come. But it's changed college athletics forever. There's no going back from this. There's no going back. But I appreciate you guys listening to today's episode of the Take Podcast, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.
Talk to me, baby. Talk to me nice. I'm from another world, baby, yeah. Broadway paradise. They think I'm way too cold, cause I put my heart up.